Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a really close look at this striking paradox in how the People's Republic of China is governed.
Hmm.
We're analyzing two powerful trends. They seem contradictory, but our source material suggests they're actually, two sides of the same strategy.
Right.
So on one hand, you've got this massive internal security clampdown, really comprehensive. It's reaching deep into the personal lives of public workers.
Yeah, very personal aspects.
And then on the other hand, China is simultaneously running this, well, increasingly assertive and pretty sophisticated campaign to influence foreign societies across multiple sectors.
It's crucial to understand, I think, that we're looking at a new phase here, a more assertive phase of Chinese control. For decades, the guiding principle was Deng Xiaoping's famous advice, keep your heads down and bide your time.
Right, lay low.
Exactly. But our sources show that strategy is basically out the window now. We see this active external push for the China option.
The idea that their model is better.
Precisely. That the state-led development model is superior to liberal democracy. But, and this is the key thing, this external confidence is directly tied to an internal demand for absolute, unyielding political loyalty.
And that loyalty is being enforced in new ways.
Through unprecedented personal restrictions on the lives of millions. It's quite stark.
The sources we're using for this deep dive, they really paint a clear picture of this duality, don't they?
They do.
We've got detailed investigative reporting on these drastic domestic restrictions. It highlights the human cost. And alongside that, there are these detailed government and think tank reports. They meticulously outline the scope, the targets, the methods of China's influence activities abroad.
What the reports often call promoting constructive vigilance. That's the term you'll see.
Right. So the mission today is basically to connect those dots. Okay, let's unpack this and maybe start with the sheer scale of this internal control.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's start inside China then, because the scope of this new policy shift, it's overwhelming when you dig into it.
It really is.
Authorities frame it, as you'd expect, as necessary for national security, anti-corruption, ideological control.
The usual justifications.
But when you look at who is actually affected, it becomes clear this is about something much broader than just, catching spies or corrupt officials.
Yeah, the breadth of the affected groups is really the core insight here. This isn't just a policy targeting high-level party cadres or Politburo members, people who might be flight risks or privy to top-tier state secrets.
No.
No, the restrictions extend far, far down the ladder. We're talking about low-ranking public employees, basic functionaries.
Like who, specifically?
Well, school teachers, sometimes even kindergarten teachers.
They're garden teachers.
Yes. Hospital nurses, engineers working at state-owned enterprises, SOEs, they call them local government contractors. The sources specifically point out that many of these individuals have, and I quote, no access to state secrets or sensitive information.
So it's not about secrets then?
It signals that the primary objective seems to be, well, purely a vast preventative campaign designed to enforce universal political loyalty across every single level of the public workforce. Every level.
And the policy doesn't even stop when you leave your job, right? The control is effectively lifelong.
That's another staggering aspect.
Yep.
It is effectively lifelong. There's an anecdote in the sources that illustrates this perfectly. It's about a retired father-in-law.
Okay.
He'd left his job at a university over 25 years ago. 25 years.
Wow.
And despite being decades removed from active service and having renewed his passport several times since retiring, he is still required by the university to submit his passport for safekeeping.
25 years later, they still want his passport.
They still want it. It's a powerful symbol of state control, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bureaucracy that basically never lets you go, even deep into retirement.
That must create an intense feeling.
Yeah.
Like you're always being watched, always managed.
Absolutely. And if we look at the actual mechanisms, the logistics of this control, it imposes severe hurdles on just basic personal freedoms.
Right.
For these public workers, international travel is categorically transformed. It's not a right anymore. It becomes a temporary, heavily regulated privilege.
So you can't just decide to go visit family overseas.
Not at all. In many major cities, the first step is simply the indefinite mandatory surrender of all passports to your employing unit.
Whether that's a school or a hospital.
Exactly. A primary school, a municipal hospital, a local government office, they hold your passport indefinitely.
So, okay, say you're a teacher, you want to visit your sister in, I don't know, Canada. You can't just book a flight next Tuesday.
Oh, far from it. That's where the bureaucratic labyrinth really begins.
Uh-huh.
To get your own document back, some individuals have to navigate as many as 4 separate layers of internal clearance.
4 layers.
4, just to take a personal trip, like a short vacation or a family visit, not even official business.
That's incredible.
And the sources detail specific sort of tailored rules for different jobs. A bank official, for instance, might be explicitly limited to just 1 personal international trip per year, period.
1 trip a year.
Yeah.
And what about professors? You mentioned teachers, but professors often travel for research or conferences, but also personal reasons. They face scrutiny too, even if their work isn't sensitive.
Oh, absolutely. Professors face a particularly intrusive level of scrutiny, even if they aren't involved in politically sensitive research.
How so?
If a professor wants their passport back for personal travel, say, to attend a wedding abroad, they have to report very specific details to their supervisor.
Like?
The precise destination, the exact duration of the trip, the purpose of travel even for personal travel, and crucially, the source of funding for the journey. Where did the money come from?
They want to know who paid for your personal vacation.
Yes. And once the trip is over, there's an explicit requirement. The passport must be turned back in to the university or the state-owned enterprise within 5 working days of returning home.
5 days. Wow.
This depth of scrutiny, digging into personal time and personal finances, it strongly suggests, ideological paranoia rather than genuine counter-espionage concern.
And when these institutions are challenged, what's their rationale? How do they justify this?
Well, the rationale provided is often incredibly vague. They use these sweeping, non-specific phrases, things like ensuring that teaching, research, and management work maintains normal order.
That could mean anything.
Exactly. Or they'll simply say they're following the spirit of the relevant documents of the superiors. It sounds very much like they are consciously creating a kind of legal gray area to justify actions that are, frankly, extra legal.
Because the law itself doesn't allow this, right?
That is precisely the mechanism of control here.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, the policy is highly dubious. China's own law, specifically Article 16 of the Detailed Rules for the Implementation of the Law on the Administration of the Exit and Entry of Chinese Citizens, it states very clearly that only designated high-level authorities.
Like the police or courts.
Exactly. Public security organs, courts, or the original authority that issued the document. Only they have the legal power to revoke or confiscate documents. The institutions themselves, the schools, the hospitals, the companies, they do not have that power under the law.
Yet they're demanding custody anyway, holding the passports.
They are. They're essentially circumventing the explicit law by relying on these vague internal mandates. And of course, the implicit threat of severe disciplinary action or even job loss against any employee who refuses to hand over their passport.
So it's enforcement through employment contracts and, well, bureaucratic intimidation. Sidestepping the legal system.
Precisely. It effectively bypasses the legal framework.
And this creates impossible situations when things go wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The sources mentioned a case, a China telecom employee.
Ah, yes. That anecdote is profoundly frustrating and very illustrative. This employee needed his passport back, but the company claimed they had lost it.
Okay, so he goes to the police to report it lost.
Exactly. He tried to get a new one, but the police refused to issue a missing person report for the passport. Their reasoning, simply, the company had it.
Even though the company said they lost it.
Even though the company apparently told him they'd lost it, it demonstrates the bureaucratic catch-22 perfectly.
Wow.
He was completely trapped. The entity legally responsible for the document, the police, wouldn't acknowledge it was lost because the company should have had it, and the company wasn't, it seems, officially reporting it lost, so the individual had no legal recourse. His freedom of movement, represented by that passport, was just erased.
Not by a court order, but just by bureaucratic paralysis.
By the inertia of centralized bureaucratic control, his individual rights just vanished into that gray area. And we really need to shift focus slightly now to understand that these localized passport seizures, as dramatic as they are, they're just one part of a much wider and arguably more arbitrary toolkit.
Yeah, okay.
A toolkit used to tighten state control over nearly all aspects of people's lives. And that is the massive expansion of the exit ban system.
Right. It's easy to think an exit ban only applies to really high-profile targets, famous dissidents or major criminal suspects.
That's the common assumption.
But the evidence shows the net is cast much, much wider, doesn't it? Affecting not just the accused, but their families, even people just tangentially connected to state interests.
That's absolutely right. The legal framework underpinning exit bans is, well, it's sprawling and seems intentionally vague.
Oh, so.
There are at least 14 different laws in China that provide some kind of legal basis for implementing an exit ban. 14.
14 different laws.
Yes. And critically, the source material describes these laws as fragmented and arguably overly broad. This leads to inconsistencies in how they're applied. Plus, the power to actually enforce these bans isn't centralized in one place.
Ah.
It's spread across a huge range of governmental bodies, judicial bodies, which naturally almost guarantees non-transparent and often quite arbitrary enforcement on the ground.
And the person being banned often has no idea beforehand. They just find out at the airport.
Correct. That's often how it happens. People frequently only discover they are subject to an exit ban when they are physically stopped at a border crossing, or sometimes when they apply for a new passport or travel document. And in some, perhaps more recent cases, they might find out through a sudden cancellation notification that appears on one of those mobile apps designed for citizens who are already under some form of internal state control.
Wow. Just an app notification tells you can't leave the country.
And the decision itself, the decision to enforce the ban or seize a passport, is often based on what the sources call the arbitrary and usually non-reviewable decision of the official in charge. That gives immense, unchecked power to local bureaucrats.
And this is where the policy becomes explicitly coercive, isn't it? The use of these bans against relatives as a tool of collective punishment to force fugitives to return.
Yes.
Essentially treating family members, even foreign citizens, as bargaining chips.
This strategy is formally employed. It's sometimes referred to as a tool to persuade to return alleged economic criminals or other fugitives who are abroad.
And there are specific cases mentioned.
The case of the U.S. siblings, Victor and Cynthia Liu, is probably the most high-profile and frankly disturbing example.
What happened to them?
Victor was a sophomore at Georgetown University. Cynthia was about to start a prestigious job at McKinsey. They traveled to China together in 2018 to visit family, specifically their ailing grandmother.
Okay, sounds normal.
But they were subsequently banned from leaving China for 3 years until 2021.
3 years? Why?
The only stated reason given was to pressure their father, who was not in China and is estranged from them, to return. He was wanted in China on alleged economic crimes.
So they held the kids, U.S. citizens, to get the father.
Essentially, yes. They were used as leverage.
That seems wildly counterproductive, doesn't it? If China wants to promote its image abroad, holding U.S. citizens hostage as bargaining chips seems like it would completely undermine that goal.
Logically, it does, but it demonstrates a clear prioritization. Internal political control, ensuring nobody can escape accountability, apparently outweighs the negative press it generates internationally. The message sent internally is deemed more important. And we see the same pattern with another U.S. citizen, Daniel Su. He was held under an exit ban for over 4 years, from 2017 to 2021.
Also for relative.
Entirely because of his father's alleged embezzlement. Daniel Su himself wasn't accused of any crime. In fact, he was actually detained for months under RSDL residential surveillance at a designated location and forced by authorities to call his father to try and persuade him to return to China.
So they forced him to act as an agent against his own father.
Yes. It demonstrates that holding foreign citizenship offers almost no protection when the state decides to use family members as instruments of coercion.
Beyond this kind of family coercion, the bans are also explicitly used as a, quote, foreign policy weapon, right? Specifically targeting journalists and critics.
Absolutely. Foreign journalists are clear targets. There's the example of Matthew Carney, an Australian journalist with the ABC. He fled China in 2018.
What prompted that?
Before he left, the police interrogated both him and, incredibly, his teenage daughter. They forced them to record confessions over highly dubious alleged visa crimes. He was explicitly told he was under an exit ban and could not leave. He managed to get out anyway.
Wow. And there were others.
Yes. In 2020, 2 other Australian journalists, Bill Birtles and Michael Smith. They were suddenly barred from leaving and actually sought refuge in Australian diplomatic missions.
Why were they targeted?
They were told they were persons of interest in a national security investigation connected to Cheng Lei, another journalist who had been detained. This tactic sends a very chilling signal to the entire foreign press corps about the potential consequences of reporting critically.
And we absolutely must acknowledge the specific, long-standing bans that are applied systematically to entire ethnic and religious groups. This isn't just individual cases, it's policy.
That's a key part of the structural repression we see. Tibetans and Uyghurs face systematic barriers preventing free travel. It's incredibly difficult for them to get passports in the first place.
Right.
And for Uyghurs who have managed to get abroad, the denial of passport renewals is a major tool of control. They're often only given one-way travel documents back to China.
Which they obviously wouldn't want to use.
Exactly. They naturally fear using them because of the high probability of detention upon return. And the process to even obtain a passport in the first place, even if you're not politically active. The sources describe it as requiring immense effort and financial risk.
Like bribes.
Yes. One source mentioned obtaining 2 passports involved something like $4,000 USD in bribes and required getting stamps from 10 different, often reluctant government offices. This systemic barrier puts enormous pressure on family members who are still in China. They become leveraged, too.
And finally, the human rights defenders.
Yeah.
The activists. They are directly silenced through these bans.
For HRDs, these exit bans are a blunt instrument, a simple tool to prevent them from traveling overseas and criticizing the government from abroad.
And they find out how.
Sometimes through those app cancellations we mentioned earlier, a digital notification that they are now officially on a list of persons under internal control. One activist who actually challenged her ban was told very directly by a police officer the purpose was simply, quote, to stop you from criticizing our government. We can't control you if you go overseas.
So it's explicitly about controlling the narrative outside China's borders by physically containing critics within them.
Precisely. The state views their international voice as a direct threat that must be physically neutralized by preventing travel.
Okay, so this incredibly tight, almost suffocating internal crackdown. This demand for absolute political loyalty from everyone, right down to kindergarten teachers and retirees.
Yeah.
This is happening at the same time that Beijing is running this aggressive global campaign to shape the world's view of China. It really is an ideological war fought on 2 fronts, isn't it?
It is.
The Hoover Institution report we looked at, it terms this external effort promoting constructive vigilance. What does that really mean in practice?
Well, what's essential to grasp first is the underlying motivation. It's rooted in the Leninist nature of the regime. The PRC operates as a Leninist state, and under Xi Jinping, that's marked by ever-increasing ideological indoctrination and control internally.
Okay.
The goal abroad is, in many ways, equally about ideological dominance. It's about controlling the narrative about China, shaping the policies, and thinking of other societies towards China, and often using methods that can undermine democratic processes in those societies.
And the targets for this influence have expanded dramatically, haven't they? It's not just about controlling what the Chinese diaspora thinks anymore. That used to be the traditional focus.
Correct. That was the traditional United Front focus. But the influence activities have strategically moved far beyond just diaspora communities.
For the targets now.
The targets now encompass a much broader and arguably more consequential range of sectors in Western societies. We're talking about major think tanks, elite universities, prominent media organizations, and even state and local government institutions.
And the goal is multifaceted.
It is. It's complex. It's partly about promoting sympathetic views of China and the CCP. It's partly about suppressing alternative or critical views, especially on politically sensitive topics like Taiwan, Tibet, Xinjiang, human rights.
Right.
And it's also about systematically co-opting key foreign players, individuals, and institutions, getting them to support China's overarching foreign policy goals and economic interests.
This kind of strategic influence must require a massive bureaucracy behind it, a lot of coordination. You mentioned state organs earlier.
It requires a highly coordinated approach. The Chinese government calls this waxuan, which translates basically as external propaganda. This whole effort is managed primarily by 3 key state and party organs.
Okay, who are they?
First, there's the Central Committee United Front Work Department, the UFWD. Its job is mainly managing relationships with non-party entities, both inside China and overseas, to ensure they align with Beijing's goals. Think influence through organizations.
Got it. Who else?
Second, the External Propaganda Leading Group. Now, this group operates with a sort of dual identity. It's also known publicly as the State Council Information Office, or SCIO. This is the office that really controls the public narrative, the messaging.
Okay, UFWD and SCIO. And the third?
The third key player is the Central Committee Foreign Affairs Commission. These 3 organs work together, constantly mobilizing resources to project influence across multiple, seemingly unrelated sectors. It's a whole-of-government approach.
This relentless effort, particularly through the United Front, to harness the overseas diaspora, based on this presumption that ethnic Chinese automatically owe some kind of loyalty to the motherland that seems inherently dangerous for Chinese Americans, they're citizens of the U.S.?
It creates a deeply fraught and unfair situation. You're absolutely right. This assumption, often pushed by Beijing, risks generating indiscriminate suspicion towards the entire Chinese American community.
Even though most aren't involved.
Exactly. Despite the reality that the vast majority are loyal American citizens, and those who actually accept or follow Beijing's directives are a very, very small minority.
So what's the takeaway for institutions here?
It's paramount, the sources stress, that institutions, universities, government agencies, NGOs rigorously inform the Chinese American community about the nature of these potentially inappropriate activities carried out by the PRC. Education is key. But, crucially, they must simultaneously make the utmost effort to protect their rights and prevent them from falling under an indiscriminate cloud of suspicion just because of their heritage. It's a very fine line to walk. #TAG-V, key vectors of influence.
Okay, let's delve into the specifics then. How does this external campaign actually manifest? Where do we see it targeting specific institutions? Maybe start with academia, universities. That seems to be where a lot of the friction points have been publicized.
Yes, universities are definitely a prime and continuous vector for influence operations. The most visible channel, historically at least, has been the Confucius Institutes, the CIs.
Right, the language and culture centers, how many are there?
At the time of the reports we looked at, there were around 110 Confucius Institutes and over 500 Confucius classrooms operating just in the U.S.
And they're sponsored by?
They're sponsored by an entity called the Hanban. Now, Hanban has direct, explicit ties to the CCP Central Committee's external propaganda leading group, that SCIO office we just talked about.
Ah, okay, so that linkage itself tells you something.
It tells you immediately that these are not purely benign cultural outreach centers like, say, Germany's Goethe Institute or France's Alliance Française. There's a political dimension embedded from the start.
So the real risk isn't just about students learning some basic Mandarin phrases. It's about potentially compromising academic freedom and intellectual independence within these Western universities.
Precisely. That's the core concern. The risks really revolve around several key issues that have been documented.
Such as?
One is the exclusive use of PRC-approved teaching materials, which naturally present a particular viewpoint. Another is the mandated avoidance or careful framing of politically charged topics.
The 3 Ts and others.
Exactly. We're talking about the systematic suppression or marginalization of discussion regarding Tibet, the Tiananmen Square massacre, the situation in Xinjiang, the Falun Gong movement, and broader human rights issues in China.
So if a university program consistently avoids these topics because its funding comes from a CI,
then that constitutes a serious, fundamental infringement on the principles of independent inquiry and open discourse that are supposed to define university curricula in democratic societies.
And it's not just the institutes themselves. Students can sometimes be involved in monitoring, too, through these Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, the CSSAs.
Yes, that's another layer. The CSSAs, while appearing as ordinary student groups, sometimes function as a sort of early warning system for the PRC government.
How?
They might alert Chinese diplomatic missions, consulates, or the embassy about campus events they deem politically offensive. For instance, if a university invites the Dalai Lama to speak.
And does Beijing react to that information?
Oh, yes. The state's retaliation mechanism can be swift and direct. The sources mention a specific incident at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD.
What happened there?
UCSD invited the Dalai Lama to give a commencement speech. After this happened, Beijing retaliated directly. They banned any students or scholars who receive funding from the state-run China Scholarship Council from attending UCSD in the future.
Wow, so they used financial leverage tied to student exchange to punish the university for an invitation.
Yeah. Exactly. It sends a clear message. There's a financial and academic price tag attached if your institution commits what Beijing sees as an ideological transgression.
This really brings us to a fundamental problem in the whole relationship, doesn't it? This profound asymmetry of scholarly exchange. It seems to heavily favor Beijing.
It's a core vulnerability for Western academia and a source of growing frustration. American scholars trying to do research in China face increasing, often arbitrary restrictions.
Like what kinds of restrictions?
Archives being suddenly closed without warning or explanation, Chinese academic counterparts becoming increasingly reluctant to meet openly or collaborate, likely due to political pressure, normal scholarly research practices that are permitted everywhere else being routinely prohibited or obstructed.
Meanwhile, Chinese scholars in the U.S.
Meanwhile, Chinese students and scholars generally enjoy full, unimpeded access to all the information, resources, libraries, labs, and institutions in the U.S. It's a complete mismatch.
That lack of reciprocity seems unsustainable.
It fundamentally contradicts the very idea of a fair and balanced bilateral exchange. It's something institutions really need to address collectively.
And this asymmetry extends directly to financial leverage, too. Universities are put in tough positions, having to make ethical choices about grants that come with obvious political strings attached.
Absolutely. The sources cite a really compelling anecdote about this. It involved a university in Washington, D.C.
What was the situation?
They were offered a very lucrative grant, $500,000 a year, intended to establish a new Chinese studies center. Sounds great, right?
On the surface, yes.
But the conditions attached were highly problematic. They included requirements to give public frequent platforms for speeches to Chinese government officials, and also stipulations that faculty from the partner university in China would teach courses as part of the center.
So basically importing PRC perspectives directly into the curriculum.
That was the concern. The university consulted its own Chinese studies faculty who advised against it, and the university ultimately declined the offer. They recognized that the terms crossed a critical line regarding academic independence. It looked too much like ideological infiltration dressed up as a generous grant.
Okay, moving beyond academia. How is influence exercised in the media sphere and within corporations?
In the media landscape, they employ a strategy that they themselves sometimes term the borrowed boat strategy.
Borrowed boat. What's the idea there?
The idea is to use friendly foreigners, or perhaps pro-PRC Chinese immigrants, that's the borrowed boat, to publicize China's official story through American organizations or platforms. This makes the narrative sound more indigenous, more credible than if it came directly from Beijing.
Clever.
It is. And this is coupled with a very concentrated push to dominate the Chinese language media landscape within the U.S. through outlets like Qiaobao newspaper or Sinovision television.
Are these linked to the Chinese state?
The sources indicate these outlets were established with funding or have strong ties to the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, the OCAO, which is part of the United Front system. They also often use simplified Chinese characters, specifically appealing to immigrants from the mainland, rather than traditional characters used in Taiwan or Hong Kong.
So the goal there is twofold. Control the information ecosystem for the diaspora community.
Yes. Shape their views.
And then potentially shape American politics through that segment of the population.
Exactly. The stated goals, according to the sources analyzing PRC documents, are essentially threefold. Influence the overseas Chinese community, gain a measurable say in American politics, and of course, protect the national image by promoting positive stories and countering criticism.
Do we see direct pressure on established U.S. media outlets as well, even government-funded ones?
Yes, there's evidence of that too. The Voice of America, VOA, is a key example. Staffers there reported significant pressure, leading the VOA Mandarin service to shift away from hard-hitting political stories about China.
Towards what kind of content?
Towards softer programming. Things focusing on travel, culture, English language teaching, like a show called Cultural Odyssey. Less politics, more fluff.
And what prompted that shift?
This reported shift followed the controversial dismissal of the head of the Mandarin service, apparently after a contentious interview was aired with a prominent Chinese dissident. It sent a clear signal internally and perhaps externally that even state-funded foreign media outlets aren't immune to pressure regarding their China coverage.
Okay, let's talk corporations. The sheer size of the Chinese market must give Beijing immense leverage over major U.S. companies.
Immense leverage, and they use it strategically.
Turning companies into involuntary lobbyists, essentially.
That's a good way to put it. This is a highly sophisticated form of economic coercion. Beijing understands very well the political influence that American CEOs and major corporations can wield in Washington.
Because they lean on them.
They actively cultivate relationships with these executives and sometimes directly leverage them to lobby against U.S. government policies that the PRC opposes.
Is there a concrete example of that?
Yes. President Xi Jinping himself reportedly warned a group of global CEOs back in 2018. He told them that if the U.S. didn't back off from the ongoing tariff war, China would retaliate with what he called qualitative measures, specifically targeted at their companies operating in China.
Qualitative measures. That sounds ominous.
It's deliberately vague, but clearly threatening. It's an explicit use of China's economic power to try and manipulate the political process in a foreign country by pressuring its corporations.
In Hollywood, that's always cited as a classic case study of how market compulsion leads to self-censorship, basically warping artistic vision to maintain access to that huge Chinese box office.
Absolutely. Hollywood views the Chinese market as pretty much indispensable now for the financial success of big-budget blockbuster films.
And that compulsion leads to...
It leads directly to self-censorship, which manifests in various ways. Cutting scenes that might offend Chinese censors, ensuring positive representation of China or Chinese characters, deliberately casting Chinese actors in prominent roles, and sometimes actively co-opting narratives to align with China's soft power objectives.
The sources mentioned specific film examples.
Yes, they pointed to major Hollywood space films like Gravity and The Martian. In both movies, China plays a surprisingly positive, even heroic role, essentially saving the American protagonists.
Right.
The irony, particularly in Gravity, is staggering. The plot of Gravity involves space debris created by the Russians shooting down a satellite. Yet in the real world, China is the only nation to have actually shot down one of its own satellites in a highly controversial anti-satellite missile test back in 2007, creating a huge amount of dangerous space debris.
So the film literally inverted the reality to make China look good.
It appears that way. The narrative was arguably inverted to fit a politically favorable context. It shows how market pressure can completely distort factual accuracy and independent artistic creation in Hollywood.
Okay, let's wrap up these vectors of influence by looking quickly at two final areas mentioned. State and local government engagement, and the big one, technology expropriation.
Right. Regarding state and local government, Beijing views these local-level exchanges, they call them jiuliu, not just as benign cultural activities, but as critical political tools.
Political tools how?
Organizations like the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association, USCPFA, which facilitates many of these exchanges, actively promote what they call positive ties. But these ties often align perfectly with Beijing's official political positions. For example, demanding that U.S. counterparts respect the declaration that resolving Taiwan's status is purely an internal Chinese affair. Furthermore, the companies that actually bring Chinese delegations over for these exchanges, they all depend entirely on official PRC government sanction for their business. Their entire business model is inherently political. They are not disinterested actors. They are subject to CCP imperatives.
And local U.S. officials often aren't equipped to see that political dimension, are they? They might just see a chance for economic development or cultural exchange.
That is a major vulnerability identified in the reports. Local governments, mayors, governors, city councils often lack the necessary political risk analysis capabilities to critically assess these partnerships and the organizations involved.
So what's the advice for them?
The advice derived from the sources is pretty clear. Local governments need to develop their own expertise in this area. They need to rigorously follow the money and power, meaning figure out which specific ministry or entity in Beijing has the ultimate decision-making authority in any proposed cooperative venture, rather than just dealing with an intermediary. And they absolutely need to communicate regularly with federal agencies like the FBI's local field office whenever doubts arise about a proposal or the true affiliations of the Chinese individuals and organizations they're engaging with. And critically, avoid treating other stakeholders, like Taiwan, in a prejudiced way just to curry favor with Beijing.
Right. Okay, finally, technology expropriation.
Right.
This goes beyond just influence into outright theft, doesn't it? Arguably the most damaging vector.
Yes, this is described as a multifaceted, highly aggressive, state-sponsored effort. It targets U.S. universities, corporations, and government research labs simultaneously.
What methods are used?
All sorts. Outright cyber theft, espionage, insider threats, but also more subtle methods like forcing technology transfers as a condition of market access for foreign companies. Exploiting the traditional openness of university research labs, leveraging joint research centers. The sources specifically cite the example of the China-U.S. Joint Research Center for Ecosystem and Environmental Change, which involved the University of Tennessee and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
So it's a systematic effort to acquire sensitive technology.
It's described as a deliberate, potentially disabling form of penetration, aiming to acquire U.S. commercial advantages and military capabilities without the cost or time of indigenous R&D. The consensus in the reports is stark. China, whether through direct state action or state-condoned actors, is unequivocally identified as the most serious offender globally when it comes to intellectual property theft. #tag Knox6, global context and reciprocity. Now, what really stands out when you synthesize all this information, all these different reports and analyses,
Yeah.
is that the influence campaign we've just detailed, it's not restricted to the United States. This is a global blueprint. Other democratic societies around the world are facing very similar pressures, and in some cases, perhaps even more intensely.
Right. It seems like certain countries might almost be designated as like testing grounds for refining these influence tactics. Where is this pressure showing up most acutely, according to the sources?
Australia is frequently cited as the canary in the coal mine, as having experienced perhaps the most intense and sophisticated interference operations.
Why Australia?
Well, the CCP has apparently used its interference capability quite openly there as a form of diplomatic leverage. For example, explicitly pressuring the Australian government to ratify a controversial extradition treaty by linking it to other bilateral issues.
And there was that case with the senator.
Ah, yes, the notorious case of former Senator Sam Dastyari. That perfectly illustrates the transactional nature of this influence.
Remind us what happened there.
He was ultimately forced to resign from Parliament after it was revealed he had accepted money, essentially a donation, from a prominent Chinese-Australian businessman with ties to the CCP. And in return, Dastyari publicly contradicted his own party's official stance on the highly contentious South China Sea issue, adopting Beijing's line instead.
So a direct quid pro quo, money for political influence.
It showed explicit transactional influence leading directly to tangible political consequences at a high level. That really woke Australia up.
What about neighboring New Zealand? It's often perceived as being perhaps more neutral or less confrontational. Is it happening there too?
Yes, New Zealand has faced considerable and sustained influence efforts, according to the research. This includes substantial political contributions. Individuals with documented ties to United Front Work Department organizations have reportedly donated millions of dollars, primarily directed towards the center-right National Party.
And in the media.
Similar patterns. Chinese language media outlets in New Zealand are described as cooperating closely with China's official Xinhua news service. They apparently receive explicit editorial instructions, part of that global strategy to seamlessly blend overseas Chinese media content with official PRC propaganda, thereby controlling the narrative for the diaspora community there as well.
It's important, though, to see how different nations are responding. Some countries, even smaller ones with close links to China, seem to be pushing back quite forcefully when they detect overt interference.
That's true. Singapore is a crucial example here. They've demonstrated near zero tolerance for what they perceive as subversion.
Despite having a majority ethnic Chinese population and strong ties.
Exactly. Despite those very strong links, Singapore took firm action back in 2017. They expelled a prominent academic, Wang Jing.
On what grounds?
They publicly identified him as an agent of influence of a foreign country. The Ministry of Home Affairs released a statement saying he had knowingly cooperated with foreign intelligence agencies to influence Singapore's foreign policy. He allegedly did this by giving supposedly privileged information to influential Singaporeans to shape their opinions in favor of that foreign country.
So Singapore didn't just see it as academic lobbying, but as actual foreign interference.
As profound subversion, they drew a very clear line.
Okay, what about the major European economies? Like Germany, where business interests often seem to heavily dictate foreign policy towards China.
Well, in major European countries like Germany, the UK, and France, the influence efforts are often focused quite heavily through the business community. That makes sense given the economic ties.
And Germany is particularly susceptible.
Germany's business sector, because of its massive reliance on the Chinese market, especially in automotive and manufacturing, is often considered the most susceptible to this kind of pressure.
Is there an example of that pressure working?
A prime example often cited is the automotive giant Daimler, Mercedes-Benz's parent company. They apologized publicly not just once, but twice after their brand used a quote from the Dalai Lama on its official Instagram account.
Just for using a quote.
Yes. This seemingly minor act triggered massive, apparently organized protests online within China, amplified by state media, and a consumer backlash. Daimler quickly backtracked and apologized profusely to appease the Chinese market.
So that clearly demonstrates how even seemingly minor political transgressions can trigger severe economic pressure globally, forcing major corporations to prioritize market access over principles like free speech.
Precisely. It sends a powerful message to all global corporations about the potential costs of offending Beijing.
So, okay, pulling all this together, what does this mean for you, the listener? And for these Western institutions, universities, companies, governments that have to continue engaging with China somehow, while also protecting themselves from this influence and interference.
Well,
The sources seem to stress two fundamental needs: transparency and reciprocity.
that really emerges as the core strategic imperative, yes.
Yeah.
Transparency about funding, transparency about relationships, and reciprocity and access and opportunity.
So for key institutions like universities and think tanks, what's the practical recommendation?
The recommendation is often for them to work together, perhaps through their professional associations or consortia, to formulate a standardized code of conduct outlining acceptable practices for engagement with foreign state-linked entities, not just from China.
Why work together?
This is essential to prevent China, or any other state actor, from picking off individual institutions one by one, using a classic divide-and-conquer strategy, offering funds or partnerships to one university after another, until someone accepts terms others deem unacceptable. A common standard raises the bar for everyone.
And that code should demand reciprocity.
Absolutely. The code must mandate, or at least strongly advocate for, much greater reciprocity in scholarly and institutional access. If our scholars can't access their archives, their scholars shouldn't have unfettered access to ours. That basic fairness principle needs to be asserted more strongly.
And what about those state and local governments? We talked about their vulnerability to these sophisticated approaches. What's the advice for them?
Due diligence is absolutely paramount. Local governments simply must invest in improving their political risk analysis capabilities when dealing with foreign partnerships, especially state-linked ones.
What does that look like in practice?
They are advised to rigorously follow the money and power. That means they need to dig deeper and determine which specific Beijing ministry or state entity holds the ultimate decision-making authority in any cooperative venture they're considering, rather than just relying on the promises of an intermediary or a local representative.
And talk to the feds.
Yes, they must communicate regularly and proactively with federal agencies like the FBI, their local field office liaison, whenever any doubts or red flags arise about a proposal or about the background and affiliations of the Chinese individuals and organizations involved. Share information.
Anything else for local governments?
Yes, a crucial point. They must absolutely avoid treating other legitimate stakeholders, like representatives from Taiwan or Tibetan community groups, or Uyghur advocates in a prejudiced or exclusionary manner simply to win favor or investment from Beijing. They need to uphold democratic principles locally.
Okay. And finally, let's circle back to that crucial point about protecting the domestic Chinese-American community from undue suspicion generated by all this.
Yes, it's worth reiterating because it's so important. The utmost effort must be taken by institutions or government agencies to protect the rights and reputations of the Chinese-American community, and indeed of Chinese citizens who are living or studying legally in the U.S.
While still addressing the threat.
Exactly. At the same time, there needs to be a concerted effort to rigorously and transparently inform these communities about the nature of potentially inappropriate or coercive activities carried out by PRC state actors, particularly the United Front work, ensuring they understand the tactics being used without allowing that awareness to curdle into indiscriminate suspicion or fueling xenophobia. That balance is perhaps the hardest challenge in all of this. So if we try to summarize the core dynamic we've explored today, it really is this. China is deploying these unparalleled measures internally to restrict the physical and intellectual freedom of its own public sector, and this reaches deep into the lives of even low-level workers, teachers, engineers, even retirees, all to enforce absolute political loyalty.
Right, the internal clampdown.
Simultaneously, it is aggressively expanding its ideological and political influence abroad, across global academia, media, corporations, local governments, using that constructive vigilance playbook.
The external push.
And this creates an acute and I think profoundly destabilizing asymmetry in global engagement. Engagement from the Chinese side is heavily restricted, state-controlled, surveilled. But Chinese state entities and those acting on their behalf often enjoy relatively unfettered strategic access within open democratic societies. It's a one-way street in many respects.
Which leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, our listener, to reflect on. We've seen these drastic restrictions on personal travel for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, of non-sensitive public employees in China.
Hmm.
It strongly suggests the Leninist regime prioritizing ideological control and, perhaps crucially, the prevention of defection or disillusionment above almost all else. But this relentless pursuit of absolute political discipline demanding performative loyalty from every school nurse and retired university engineer surely comes at a heavy internal price, too.
You have to wonder.
So the question is, what impact does enforcing such widespread, pervasive loyalty testing and suspicion have on the actual efficiency, the stability, the morale, maybe even the basic functioning of the vast Chinese bureaucracy itself? Is the very pursuit of total ideological control ultimately creating a more paranoid, less innovative, less capable, and potentially in the long run, less stable state apparatus internally?
A system running on fear and compliance rather than initiative.
Exactly. Is that the unintended consequence? Something for you to mull over as you process the information from today's deep dive.